Magdalene's hand shook as she clutched the crumpled letter to her chest, the cruel words still burning in her mind. No decent man will have you now, not with that bastard child growing in your belly. You've brought shame upon our family name. The autumn wind whipped through the wooden platform of Timber Creek's train station, carrying with it the scent of pine and the promise of an early winter. She pressed her free hand against the slight swell of her stomach, feeling the flutter of life within a child conceived not from love, but from the violence of her former employer's son. The bruises had faded from her face, but the memory lingered like a scar on her soul. Miss Magdalene Fairweather? A deep voice rumbled behind her, causing her to spin around in alarm. Before her stood the largest man she had ever seen. Caspian Ironwood towered nearly 7 feet tall, with shoulders broad as a barn door and arms thick as tree trunks. His dark hair hung past his shoulders, wild and untamed, and a full beard covered the lower half of his weathered face. But it was his eyes pale blue like winter sky that held her attention. They were gentle, almost shy, completely at odds with his imposing frame. "Ah, yes," she stammered, instinctively taking a step backward. "Are you?" "Caspian Ironwood," he said quietly, removing his worn felt hat. "I got your letter about needing a husband. Come through the marriage broker service." Magdalene's cheeks burned with shame. In desperation, she had answered several advertisements from men seeking wives in the frontier territories. She had been honest about her condition, or tried to be, though her carefully worded letter had only hinted at her predicament. "Mr. Ironwood, I fear there has been some misunderstanding," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wrote that I was ... that I had complications that might affect a potential marriage." Caspian's pale eyes studied her face with surprising gentleness. "You mean the baby," he said simply. The directness of his statement made her knees weak. She had expected anger, disgust, perhaps violence. Instead, his voice held only quiet understanding. "Yes," she whispered, tears threatening to spill. "The child I sent single quotes T ... wasn't. I was not willing." The words came out in a broken rush, years of shame and fear pouring forth. "My employer's son, he..." And when I told them, they threw me out. Said I was lying, that I had tempted him. My own family wouldn't take me back. A dangerous stillness settled over Caspian's massive frame. His hands, scarred from years of mountain living, slowly clenched into fists. "He hurt you," he said, and his voice carried a coldness that made the autumn air seem warm. "It doesn't matter now," Magdalene said quickly, frightened by the change in his demeanor. "What matters is that no decent man would want a woman carrying another man's child, especially one born of such circumstances. I understand if you wish to withdraw your offer." She turned to gather her single carpetbag, expecting to hear his heavy footsteps walking away. Instead, she felt his large hand gently touch her shoulder. "Miss Fairweather," he said, his voice soft as summer rain. "Look at me." Slowly, she turned back to face him. His pale blue eyes held a warmth that made her chest tighten with unexpected emotion. "I don't care if the child isn't mine," he said, with quiet conviction. "What I care about is that you need protection, and that child needs a father. If you'll have me, I'd be honored to provide both." The words hit her like a physical blow. In all her 23 years, no one had ever spoken to her with such simple, honest kindness. She stared at him, searching his face for signs of deception or hidden cruelty, but found only sincerity. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do such a thing for a stranger? For someone who's been ... ruined?" Caspian was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he finally spoke, his voice carried old pain. "Because I know what it's like to be thrown away by the people who should protect you. Because I know what it's like to believe you're not worth loving." A gust of wind sent leaves swirling around. the platform, and Magdalene pulled her thin shawl tighter. Caspian noticed immediately and shrugged out of his heavy coat, draping it around her shoulders despite her protests. "The coat weighs more than I do," she said with the first hint of a smile she'd felt in months. "Then I'll carry you both," he replied matter-of-factly, as if such a thing were perfectly reasonable. The simple statement, delivered without boasting or expectation, broke something loose in Magdalene's chest. For the first time since her world had collapsed, she felt a fragile spark of hope. "Mr. Ironwood," she said carefully, if this arrangement were to proceed, what would you expect of me? What would be my duties?" A flush crept up Caspian's neck, barely visible through his beard. "Nothing you're not ready to give," he said firmly. "I have a cabin up on Bear Mountain. It's not fancy, but it's warm and safe. There's a garden, chickens, a good well. You'd have your own room until unless if you ever decided—" He trailed off, clearly flustered, and Magdalene realized that this giant of a man was actually nervous. The thought was both endearing and reassuring. "You would ask nothing of me?" She pressed. "No? Marital obligations?" "Not unless you wanted them," he said quietly. "I'm hoping someday you might come to care for me, but I won't force anything. The marriage would be real in the eyes of God and the law, but what happens between us would be your choice." A train whistle echoed across the valley, growing closer. Magdalene knew she had to make her decision now. She could board that train back to the city, back to poverty and shame and slow starvation. Or she could trust this gentle giant who looked at her with such careful kindness. "Mr. Ironwood," she said, extending her hand, "I believe I would very much like to see this cabin of yours." His massive hand engulfed hers with surprising gentleness, and for the first time in months, Magdalene felt truly safe. The journey to Bear Mountain took 3 days by wagon, winding through forests that grew thicker and more wild with each mile. Caspian had fashioned a comfortable nest of blankets and furs in the wagon bed, insisting that Magdalene rest while he walked alongside the sturdy draft horses. "You don't have to walk," she called down to him as they navigated a particularly rocky stretch of trail. "I'm not so delicate that sharing the seat would harm me." Caspian glanced up, his pale blue eyes crinkling at the corners. "Maybe I just like walking. Been doing it most of my life." There was something in his tone that made her curious, but before she could ask, he pointed ahead to a clearing where smoke rose from a stone chimney. "Home," he said simply. Magdalene's breath caught in her throat. The cabin wasn't the rough shack she'd expected, but a solid log structure with a wraparound porch and glass windows that caught the afternoon sunlight. A vegetable garden stretched along one side, though most of the plants had been harvested for winter. Chickens pecked in a well-fenced yard, and she could see the outline of a barn behind the main house. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Caspian's face lit up with pride and relief. "Built most of it myself over the past 5 years. The barn's newer finished it just last spring." As he helped her down from the wagon, Magdalene noticed how careful he was not to touch her more than necessary, how he averted his eyes when her dress caught briefly on the wagon wheel. His consideration was both touching and puzzling. "Caspian," she said as they stood before the cabin door, "may I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why haven't you married before now? You're clearly capable of providing for a family, and you're—" She paused, searching for the right words. "You're not unpleasant to look at." A dark shadow crossed his features. "Some things about a man's past make decent women look elsewhere," he said quietly, then forced a smile. "But that's a story for another day. For now, let me show you your room." The interior of the cabin was even more impressive than the exterior. The main room featured a massive stone fireplace with hand-carved wooden furniture that looked both sturdy and comfortable. A kitchen area occupied one corner, complete with a modern cast-iron stove and shelves lined with preserves and supplies. Everything was scrupulously clean and organized. "You did all this yourself?" Magdalene asked in amazement. "Had a lot of time on my hands," Caspian replied, leading her to a door on the far side of the room. "This would be yours." The bedroom was larger than her entire apartment back in the city. A beautiful quilt covered a bed built from logs and crafted with obvious skill. A wardrobe stood against one wall, and a small writing desk sat beneath a window that looked out over the valley below. "Caspian, this is, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll be comfortable here," he replied. "That's all I need to hear." That evening, as they shared a simple meal of venison stew and fresh bread, Magdalene found herself studying her new husband, for they had been wed that afternoon by the circuit preacher who happened to be passing through the settlement. Caspian ate with quiet efficiency, occasionally glancing at her as if to make sure she was getting enough food. "The stew is delicious," she said. "Where did you learn to cook?" "Trial and error, mostly. Burned a lot of meals before I figured it out." He paused, then added, "My mother tried to teach me some basics before she died, but I was more interested in running wild in the woods." "How old were you when she passed?" 12. A single word carried a weight of old grief. "My father ... well, he wasn't much good after that. Started drinking heavy, couldn't keep work. Eventually just disappeared one winter morning. Left me to fend for myself." Magdalene felt her heart clench at the matter-of-fact way he related such a traumatic history. "I'm sorry. That must have been terrifying for a child." Caspian shrugged, but she caught the tightness around his eyes. "Made me tough. Made me appreciate what I have now." "Is that when you came to the mountains?" "Not right away. Spent a few years ... double quotes he trailed off, his expression growing dark. "Let's just say I made some poor choices before I found my way up here. The mountains don't judge a man's past, they only care if he's strong enough to survive." Something in his tone warned her not to push further, but curiosity gnawed at her. What had this gentle giant done that made him believe he was unworthy of love? Later, as she prepared for bed in her new room, Magdalene found herself listening to the sounds of Caspian moving around the cabin. She heard him banking the fire, checking the door locks, his footsteps careful and quiet as he tried not to disturb her. When silence finally settled over the house, she realized she felt safer than she had in years, but sleep eluded her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Caspian's face when he'd said, "I don't care if the child isn't mine." The memory of his gentle hands helping her from the wagon. The way he'd looked at her during their simple wedding ceremony, not with lust or possession, but with something that looked almost like reverence. A soft sound from outside made her sit up in bed. Through her window, she could see Caspian sitting on the porch steps, his massive frame silhouetted against the moonlight. He wasn't doing anything, just sitting and staring out at the forest as if keeping watch. Without fully understanding why, Magdalene wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and slipped outside. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked softly. He turned, and in the moonlight she could see surprise and concern on his face. "Did I wake you? I tried to be quiet." "No, you were silent as a ghost. I just ... couldn't settle." She sat down beside him on the steps, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Do you always keep watch like this?" "Old habit," he said. "In the mountains, you learn to listen to the night. Animals, weather, other things that might be moving around in the dark." "Other things?" "Sometimes men come up here who shouldn't. Men running from the law or looking for someone to rob. Usually they move on when they realize there's nothing easy to take." The casual way he spoke of such dangers reminded Magdalene of just how isolated they were, how dependent she was on this man's protection. But instead of feeling vulnerable, she felt ... secure. There was something about Caspian's quiet confidence that made her believe he could handle whatever threats the wilderness might hold. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For taking me in. For asking no questions about what happened to me. For offering your protection to a child who shares no blood with you." She paused, then added, "For seeing something worth saving in me when I'd given up on myself." Caspian was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Maybe we're both getting a second chance we don't deserve," he said. "Maybe that's enough." Winter arrived early that year, blanketing Bear Mountain in snow that reached halfway up the cabin walls. Magdalene had never experienced such isolation, such complete dependence on another person's knowledge and skills. But instead of feeling trapped, she found herself settling into the rhythm of mountain life with surprising ease. Caspian proved to be an attentive teacher, showing her how to read weather signs, preserve food, and maintain the cabin's various systems. He taught her to milk the cow he'd brought down from the high pasture, to collect eggs without startling the chickens, and to tend the fire so it would burn efficiently through the long, cold nights. "You're a quick learner," he said one morning, as she successfully split kindling with the smaller axe he'd crafted specifically for her use. Her pregnancy was beginning to show more noticeably now, but she refused to let it slow her down. "I had good motivation to pay attention," she replied, setting down the axe and rubbing her lower back. "Being helpless in the wilderness didn't appeal to me." Caspian was beside her instantly, his large hands gentle on her shoulders. "You should rest. You've been working too hard." "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she protested, but she didn't pull away from his touch. Over the months, she had grown accustomed to his careful consideration, his way of anticipating her needs without making her feel helpless. "The baby's due in spring?" he asked, his hand still resting on her shoulders. "May, I think. Maybe early June." She paused, then added quietly, "Are you worried about the birth?" "We're so far from any doctor or midwife. There's a woman in the valley, Rosalind Blackwater. She's delivered more babies than any doctor, and she's helped with difficult births. When the time comes, I'll bring her up here, even if I have to. Carry her through a blizzard." The matter-of-fact way he spoke of such devotion made Magdalene's throat tight with emotion. "You would do that? Risk a dangerous journey for a child that isn't yours?" Caspian turned her gently to face him, his pale blue eyes intense. "Magdalene, that child is yours. That makes it mine too, in every way that matters. Do you understand that?" Before she could respond, a sound from outside made them both freeze. It was the distinctive crack of a branch breaking under weight, but not the random snap of wind or settling snow. This was deliberate, purposeful. Caspian's entire demeanor changed in an instant. His gentle hands became steel, moving her swiftly away from the windows. "Get in the bedroom," he whispered urgently. "Close the door and don't come out until I tell you. What's happening?" "Someone's out there." "Someone who's trying to move quietly." He was already reaching for the rifle that hung above the mantel. "Go, now." Magdalene hurried to her room, but instead of closing the door completely, she left it open just enough to peer through the crack. She watched as Caspian moved with surprising stealth for such a large man, positioning himself beside the front window where he could see outside without being seen. A voice called from the forest, rough and mocking. "Caspian Ironwood. We know. You're in there, you big bastard." Magdalene saw her husband's shoulders tense, saw his grip tighten on the rifle. Whatever this was about, it was personal. "Been a long time, Caspian," the voice continued. "Remember us? You're old friends from the lumber camps." "I remember," Caspian called back, his voice carrying a hardness Magdalene had never heard before. "I remember why I left those camps too. Harsh laughter echoed through the trees. Left? Is that what you call it? We call it running like a coward after you nearly killed poor Jeremiah. Magdalene's blood ran cold. Nearly killed someone? What had happened in Caspian's past that made men track him through the wilderness in winter? Jeremiah was trying to rape a girl, Caspian replied, his voice steady but deadly. I stopped him. If that makes me a coward in your eyes, so be it. That girl was a whore. She was paid for. She was 14 years old and screaming for help. The rage in Caspian's voice was carefully controlled but unmistakable. And she wasn't the first girl Jeremiah had forced himself on. Water under the bridge, the voice said with false joviality. We're not here about old grudges. We're here because we heard you got yourself a pretty little wife. Thought maybe we'd come calling, see if you'd share your good fortune. The crude suggestion hung in the air like a physical threat. Magdalene pressed her hand to her mouth, understanding now why Caspian had been so careful to bring her inside. To keep her hidden. My wife is under my protection, Caspian said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Any man who threatens her answers to me. Big talk from a man who's outnumbered 4-1. Then come and try me, Caspian replied. But know that I'm not the same man I was in those lumber camps. I've had 5 years in these mountains to think about what I should have done to Jeremiah and his friends. I won't make the same mistake of showing mercy twice. A long silence stretched across the clearing. Magdalene could hear her own heartbeat, thundering in her ears as she watched her husband stand ready to defend her against impossible odds. Finally, a different voice called out, younger, less certain. Maybe we should just move on, boys. He sounds like he means business. Shut up, Danny, the first voice snapped. We came all this way. We're not leaving empty-handed. Then you'll leave bloody-handed, Caspian said with chilling calm. Because, I promise you, whoever comes through that door first won't be walking away. Another long silence. Then, to Magdalene's amazement, she heard the sound of footsteps retreating, moving away from the cabin. The young voice she'd heard before called. Back one final time. This isn't over, Ironwood. Yes, it is, Caspian replied quietly, but his words carried clearly in the crisp mountain air. They waited in tense silence for nearly an hour before. Caspian finally lowered his rifle and called softly for Magdalene to come out. She emerged from the bedroom to find him still standing by the window, his massive frame rigid with barely controlled fury. When he turned to look at her, she saw something in his eyes that made her understand why those men had ultimately chosen to retreat. Are you all right? He asked, his voice gentle once again despite the storm still raging in his eyes. I should be asking you that, she replied. Those men, they knew you. From before you came to the mountains. Caspian nodded slowly, setting the rifle carefully aside. I worked in the lumber camps for a while after my father disappeared. Hard men, doing hard work. Some of them were good people just trying to make a living. Others, He trailed off, running a hand through his dark hair. Others were animals who thought their strength gave them the right to take whatever they wanted. The girl they mentioned was the daughter of one of the camp cooks. Jeremiah and his friends had been bothering her for weeks. The night I intervened, they had cornered her in the cook shack. She was so scared she could barely scream. Magdalene felt her heart clench at the pain in his voice. What did you do? I broke Jeremiah's arm in 3 places and put 2 of his friends in the camp infirmary, Caspian said matter-of-factly. Then I took the girl to the nearest town and made sure she got safe passage back to her family. When I came back to get my belongings, the camp boss told me I was no longer welcome. Because you protected an innocent child? Because I cost him 4 workers and caused unnecessary trouble, Caspian replied bitterly. That's when I came. Up here. Figured if I was going to be alone, might as well be alone somewhere beautiful. Magdalene stepped closer to him, studying his face in the firelight. You saved that girl. I should have done more. Should have made sure men like that could never hurt anyone again. You did what you could. You chose to protect someone who couldn't protect herself, even though it cost you everything." She reached out tentatively and touched his arm. "That's not the action of a bad man, Caspian. That's the action of a hero." He looked down at her with surprise, as if the thought had never occurred to him. "I'm no hero, Magdalene. I'm just a man who's tired of watching innocents get hurt." "Then you're my kind of man," she said quietly, and meant it. Spring came to Bear Mountain like a benediction, melting the snow and filling the air with the sound of rushing water and birdsong. Magdalene's pregnancy had progressed without complications, though she now moved with the careful waddle of a woman in her final weeks. Caspian had become even more attentive, if such a thing were possible, barely letting her out of his sight as her due date approached. "The cradle is beautiful," she said, running her hand over the smooth wood of the piece he had just finished. Every detail was perfect, from the gentle curve of the rockers to the intricate mountain scene carved into the headboard. "Wanted to make sure it was sturdy," Caspian replied, though she could see the pride in his eyes. "Baby deserves something that will last." The simple statement "baby deserves" made her heart flutter. Over the winter months, she had watched him prepare for the child's arrival with the same methodical care he brought to everything else. He had crafted not just the cradle, but a changing table, shelves for baby clothes, and even a series of wooden toys that demonstrated remarkable artistry. "Caspian," she said quietly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." He set down his carving tools and gave her his full attention, those pale blue eyes serious and patient. "When the baby comes, when you hold him or her for the first time, are you going to be able to love this child? Truly love them, not just care for them out of duty?" The question had been weighing on her for weeks. She had seen the tender way Caspian spoke about the baby, the care he took in preparing for its arrival. But she needed to know, could he truly accept a child born from violence? Could he love a baby that would forever remind him of her shame? Caspian was quiet for a long moment, his weathered hand still on the cradle's edge. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Last night, I felt the baby kick while you were sleeping," he said. "You were curled up against me, didn't? No, you did that, but you started reaching for me in your sleep. Anyway, I felt this little flutter against my side, and it was like everything in the world suddenly made sense." Tears began to slip down Magdalene's cheeks as he continued. "That child isn't going to care who provided the seed that started its life. All that baby's going to know is who's there when it cries, who feeds it when it's hungry, who teaches it to walk and talk and be a good person." He looked up at her with such intensity that her breath caught. "I want to be that man, Magdalene. I want to be the father that child deserves." Before she could respond, a sharp pain lanced through her abdomen, so sudden and severe that she gasped and doubled over. Caspian was beside her instantly, his large hands steady on her shoulders. "The baby?" he asked urgently. Another contraction hit, stronger this time, and Magdalene felt a warm rush of fluid down her legs. "I think yes, it's time." Caspian's face went pale beneath his beard, but his voice remained calm. "All right. Let me get you settled, then I'll ride down for Rosalind." "No," Magdalene grabbed his arm as another pain hit. "These are coming. Too fast. There's no time." As if to emphasize her point, her body was seized by another contraction, this one so powerful that she cried out despite herself. Caspian's arms came around her, supporting her weight as her legs went weak. "Bedroom," he said firmly, "now." The next several hours passed in a blur of pain and effort. Caspian proved to be surprisingly knowledgeable about childbirth, his large hands gentle but competent as he helped her through each contraction. Later, she would learn that he had assisted with the birth of farm animals countless times, but in the moment, all she knew was that he was exactly what she needed: calm, strong, and utterly devoted to seeing her safely through. "I can see the head," he said, his voice tight with concentration. "You're doing beautifully, Magdalene. Just a little more." She bore down with everything she had, her body driven by instincts older than civilization itself. With a final, exhausting push, she felt the baby slip free, and suddenly the cabin was filled with the sound of an infant's cry. "A girl," Caspian whispered, and there was such wonder in his voice that Magdalene's heart broke open with love. "She's perfect, Magdalene, absolutely perfect." Through her exhaustion, she watched as he carefully cleaned the baby, his massive hands impossibly gentle as he wrapped her in the soft blankets they had prepared. When he finally placed the infant in her arms, Magdalene looked down into a tiny face scrunched with indignation at being thrust into the cold world. "Hello, little one," she whispered, feeling that instant, overwhelming rush of maternal love that she had feared might not come. "Welcome to the world." The baby quieted at the sound of her voice. Dark blue eyes, all newborns had blue eyes, she reminded herself, blinking up at her with unfocused curiosity. But it was when Caspian leaned over them both that something magical happened. The baby's tiny hand worked free of the blankets and, as if guided by some ancient instinct, reached toward the sound of his deep voice. When her miniature fingers wrapped around his thumb, Caspian went completely still. "She knows you," Magdalene whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Look how she's holding on to you." Caspian's eyes filled with tears that he didn't try to hide. Would it be all right if I held her?" "She's your daughter," Magdalene said softly. "Of course you can hold her." The word daughter seemed to hit him like a physical blow. His hands trembled slightly as he took the baby, cradling her against his broad chest as if she were made of spun glass. "Look at you," he murmured, his deep voice rough with emotion. "Look how tiny you are. Don't worry, little princess. Your papa's going to take care of you, always." Watching this mountain of a man who had fought off 4 dangerous men without flinching, reduced to wonder by a baby who weighed less than 8 pounds, was the most beautiful thing Magdalene had ever seen. "What should we call her?" she asked. Caspian looked up from the baby's face, his pale eyes bright with tears and joy. "I was thinking ... if you approve. Maybe Aurora? For the way she came with the dawn, bringing light into our lives?" "Aurora Ironwood," Magdalene said, testing. "The name, I love it." "Aurora Ironwood," Caspian repeated, looking down at the baby with such pure adoration that Magdalene knew, without a doubt, that this child would never lack for a father's love. "Welcome home, little princess. You're exactly where you belong." Aurora's first summer was one of quiet joy and growing confidence for the little family on Bear Mountain. The baby thrived in the mountain air, growing plump and content under the devoted care of her parents. Caspian had taken to fatherhood with the same methodical dedication he brought to everything else, learning to change diapers with surprising efficiency and walking the floor at night when Aurora fussed so that Magdalene could rest. "You're going to spoil her," Magdalene said with fond exasperation as she watched Caspian carve yet another wooden toy for their 3-month-old daughter. This one was a rattle shaped like a tiny mountain lion, sanded smooth and perfectly sized for baby hands. "Can't spoil a baby with love," Caspian replied, holding up the rattle to examine his work. "Besides, look at those hands. She's going to be artistic like her mama." Magdalene glanced down at Aurora, who was lying on a blanket in the afternoon sunlight, her tiny fists waving as she gurgled happily at the patterns of light and shadow cast by the porch roof. "How do you know I'm artistic?" "The way you've been sketching in that journal I gave you. The way you see beauty in everything. Mountains, the sunset, even my ugly face when you think I'm not looking." Your face isn't ugly, Magdalene protested, though she blushed at being caught staring at him. Over the months since Aurora's birth, she had found herself increasingly aware of Caspian as a man rather than simply as a protector. The way his muscles moved when he chopped wood, the gentleness in his hands when he held their daughter, the sound of his laughter when Aurora made one of her adorable baby noises. It's scarred and weathered and generally frightening to most people, he said matter-of-factly. It's strong and kind and ... She trailed off, suddenly self-conscious about the direction of her thoughts. And what? He prompted gently. Before she could answer, Aurora let out a sharp cry of distress. Both parents moved toward her instantly, but it was Caspian who reached her first, scooping her up with practiced ease. "What's wrong, little princess?" he murmured, checking her diaper and feeling her forehead for fever. "Nothing seems amiss." But Aurora's cries continued, growing more agitated. Then Magdalene heard it, the sound of horses approaching through the forest. Multiple horses, moving at a steady pace up the mountain trail. Caspian heard it too. His entire body went alert, and he quickly handed Aurora to Magdalene while moving toward the rifle that now lived within easy reach of the front door. "More visitors from your past?" Magdalene asked quietly, though she was already moving toward the cabin with the baby. "Don't know. Stay inside until I figure out who they are." But as the riders emerged from the tree line, Caspian relaxed slightly. The lead rider was a woman, elderly but still strong in the saddle, with silver hair braided down her back and keen dark eyes that missed nothing. Behind her rode two younger women and a man who looked to be in his 30s. "Caspian Ironwood," the elderly woman called as she dismounted. "I'm Rosalind Blackwater. Heard tell you had a baby up here without the benefit of proper assistance." This was the midwife he had planned to fetch when Aurora decided to arrive early. Magdalene stepped back onto the porch with the baby, curious to meet the woman who had delivered half the children in the valley. "Mrs. Blackwater," Caspian said respectfully. "The baby came fast. No time to send for help. Babies have a way of keeping their own schedule," Rosalind replied pragmatically. She looked toward Magdalene with professional interest. "And you must be the mother. How are you feeling, dear? Any complications with the birth or recovery?" "I'm well, thank you," Magdalene replied, though she felt suddenly nervous under the older woman's scrutiny. "The baby is healthy and growing." "May I?" Rosalind gestured toward Aurora, and Magdalene found herself handing over her daughter for examination. The midwife's hands were gentle but thorough as she checked the baby's eyes, ears, and reflexes. Aurora seemed fascinated by the attention, gurgling and reaching toward Rosalind's face. "Beautiful baby," Rosalind pronounced finally. "Strong and alert. You've done well, both of you." She looked between Magdalene and Caspian with an expression that seemed to see more than either of them were comfortable revealing. "Though I notice some tension here that has nothing to do with childbirth." Before either could respond, one of the younger women stepped forward. She had the same dark eyes as Rosalind and moved with quiet confidence. "I'm Luna, Mrs. Blackwater's apprentice. We also brought news from the valley." "What kind of news?" Caspian asked, his protective instincts clearly alert. The man who had ridden with them, tall and lean with prematurely gray hair, spoke up. "There's been trouble, Caspian. Those men who came calling on you last winter. They've been causing problems down in Timber Creek, intimidating families, demanding protection money, roughing up anyone who refuses to pay." "Jeremir's crew," Caspian said grimly. "I should have finished what I started in those lumber camps. Violence isn't always the answer," Rosalind said firmly. "But something needs to be done. They're terrorizing decent people, and the sheriff's either too scared or too bought to act." Magdalene felt a chill run through her despite the warm afternoon air. Are we in danger? Is Aurora? Not directly, the gray-haired man replied. But they've been asking questions about you, Caspian. About your pretty wife, and whether you might be more cooperative if they had the right leverage. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Magdalene instinctively pulled Aurora closer, her mind racing through possibilities. They were so isolated up here, so far from any help if those men decided to make good on their threats. We could leave, she said quietly. Go somewhere they can't find us. Run where? Caspian asked, his voice heavy with frustration. Men like that don't give up easy. They'd follow us, and next time we might not have warning of their approach. Rosalind stepped forward, her weathered face stern with determination. Or you could help us stop them once and for all. The people of Timber Creek are good folk, but they're farmers and shopkeepers, not fighters. They need someone with your skills, Caspian. My skills, he repeated bitterly. You mean my capacity for violence. I mean your ability to protect the innocent, Luna said softly. That's what you did for that girl in the lumber camps. That's what you've done for your wife and daughter. Sometimes good men have to fight so that others don't have to. Magdalene watched the internal struggle play across Caspian's face. She could see the part of him that wanted to ride down that mountain and end the threat permanently. But she could also see his fear not of the men themselves, but of what he might become if he let that darkness loose again. What are you asking? Me to do? He said finally. Help us set a trap, the gray-haired man replied. Draw them out somewhere we can handle them properly. With witnesses, with backup, with the law on our side this time. And if it goes wrong, if someone gets hurt? Someone's going to get hurt anyway, Rosalind said bluntly. Question is whether it's innocent families or the men who've been terrorizing them. Aurora chose that moment to fuss, her tiny face scrunching with displeasure at being held by a stranger for so long. Rosalind immediately handed her back to Magdalene, and the baby settled instantly against her mother's familiar warmth. I need time to think, Caspian said. This isn't just about me anymore. I have responsibilities here. Of course, Rosalind replied. But don't take too long. Fear has a way of spreading, and those men are getting bolder by the day. After the visitors had gone, promising to return in a week for Caspian's decision, the cabin felt oppressively quiet. Magdalene put Aurora down for her afternoon nap, then found Caspian standing on the porch, staring out at the forest as if searching for answers among the trees. You want to help them, she said, joining him at the railing. I want to keep you and Aurora safe, he replied. Everything else is secondary to that. But you feel guilty about the people in the valley. About letting those men hurt innocent families when you could stop it. He looked at her with surprise, as if amazed by her perception. How do you do that? See straight through to what I'm thinking? Because I know you, she said simply. I know that you're the kind of man who can't stand by while others suffer. It's why you saved that girl. It's why you married me. It's who you are, Caspian. It's also what makes me dangerous, he said quietly. When I fought those men before, I wasn't thinking about right and wrong. I was thinking about stopping them permanently. That's not justice, Magdalene. That's vengeance. She was quiet for a moment, considering his words. Then she reached out and took his hand, her small fingers intertwining with his large ones. What if it doesn't have to be either? She said. What if there's a third option? What do you mean? You said they've been asking about me, about us. What if we use that against them? What if the bait in this trap wasn't just you, but all of us? Caspian went rigid. Absolutely not. I won't risk you or Aurora. Listen to me, she pressed. They want to use us as leverage against you, right? They think we're your weakness. But what if we turn that around? What if we make them think they have an opportunity to take us, but it's actually a trap? Magdalene, no. I won't even consider it. Why not? Because I'm a woman? Because I can't handle myself in a dangerous situation? Because you're everything. That matters to me." The words burst from him with such force that she stepped back in surprise. "Because the thought of losing you, either of you, is the only thing in this world that truly terrifies me." The raw honesty in his voice made her heart race. She stared at him, seeing not the careful restraint he usually maintained, but the depth of feeling he'd been holding back. "Caspian," she whispered, "are you saying that you ... that we ... "I'm saying I love you," he said roughly. "I've been trying not to, trying to give you time and space to heal from what was done to you. But I can't pretend anymore, especially not when you're talking about putting yourself in danger." The confession hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Magdalene felt her world shift, realizing that what she had taken for protectiveness and duty was actually something far deeper and more precious. "I love you too," she said softly, and watched his eyes widen with wonder and hope. "I think I have for months, but I was afraid to admit it. Afraid you might not want that kind of marriage with me." "Want it?" he breathed. "Magdalene, it's all I've wanted since the day you smiled at me on that train platform." She stepped closer to him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his large frame. "Then trust me to help you with this. Trust that we're stronger together than apart." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "If anything happened to you ... nothing will happen to me," she said with quiet conviction. "Because I have you protecting me. Because we have each other." And then, finally, he kissed her. Gentle at first, almost hesitant, as if he couldn't quite believe she truly wanted this. But when she melted against him, her arms sliding around his neck, the kiss deepened into something that spoke of months of careful restraint finally released when they broke apart. Both breathing hard, Caspian rested his forehead against hers. "All right," he said quietly. "We'll find a way to stop them. Together. But promise me something. Anything. Promise me that no matter what happens, you'll remember that you and Aurora are my whole world. That everything I do is to protect that world." "I promise," she whispered. "If you promise me something in return." "What's that?" "Promise me that when this is over, we'll stop being so careful with each other, that we'll be husband and wife in every sense of the word." The heat that flared in his pale blue eyes made her knees weak with anticipation. "That," he said roughly, "is the easiest promise I've ever made." The plan they devised was both simple and terrifying. Word would be spread through Timber Creek that Caspian had to travel to the territorial capital on business, leaving his wife and baby alone on the mountain for several days. It was exactly the kind of opportunity that Jaramir's crew would find. Irresistible a chance to take Caspian's family as leverage while he was away and defenseless. But Caspian wouldn't actually be gone. He would be hidden in the forest around the cabin, along with a carefully selected group of men from the valley who were tired of living in fear. When Jaramir's men made their move, they would find themselves surrounded and outnumbered. "You're sure about this?" Rosalind asked as they finalized the details. She had returned with a small group of volunteers, including Luna and the gray-haired man whose name Magdalene had learned was Marcus Stonefield, a former soldier who had settled in the valley after the war. "As sure as I can be about anything." "That puts my family at risk," Caspian replied grimly. He had been on edge for days, alternating between protective hovering and restless pacing. "But doing nothing puts them at risk too." Magdalene, nursing Aurora in the cabin's main room, tried to project calm confidence despite the butterflies in her stomach. "How many men will be hiding in the woods?" 8, Marcus replied. "All good shots, all men who have personal reasons for wanting Jaramir's crew stopped. They've been terrorizing the valley for months now. And if something goes wrong?" She pressed. If they get past your perimeter and make it to the cabin. Caspian's jaw tightened. They won't. But if they do? Then you barricade yourself in the bedroom with Aurora and wait for us to handle it, he said firmly. Under no circumstances do you try to be a hero. Magdalene wanted to argue, but she could see the barely controlled fear in his eyes. This plan was asking him to trust others with the most precious things in his world, and it was clearly taking every ounce of his discipline not to call the whole thing off. It's going to work, Luna said quietly. She had been uncharacteristically subdued all day, and Magdalene suspected the young woman was more nervous than she was letting on. These men are used to intimidating helpless victims. They won't be prepared for organized resistance. They're also used to violence, Caspian pointed out darkly. Don't underestimate them just because they're bullies. 2 days later, the trap was set. Caspian made a great show of riding down the mountain trail in broad daylight, his saddlebags packed as if for a long journey. But as soon as he was out of sight of the cabin, he circled back through the dense forest, taking up position in a carefully chosen hiding spot with clear sight lines to the cabin's approach routes. Magdalene spent the day in forced normalcy, caring for Aurora, doing chores, trying to act like a woman alone and vulnerable. But as evening approached, her nerves began to fray. Every sound from the forest made her heart race. Every bird call could be a signal from the hidden watchers. Aurora seemed to sense her mother's tension, fussing more than usual and refusing to settle for her afternoon nap. By the time darkness fell, both mother and baby were on edge. "It's all right, sweetheart," Magdalene murmured, walking the floor with Aurora pressed against her shoulder. "Papa's watching over us." "Everything's going to be," the sound of horses approaching cut through the night air like a knife. Multiple horses, moving carefully but not bothering to hide their presence. They were coming. Magdalene's hand shook. As she lit the oil lamp in the window, the signal to let the hidden men know the targets had arrived. Then she retreated to the bedroom as planned, settling into the rocking chair with Aurora and trying to keep her breathing steady. She could hear voices now, rough and crude as they discussed their plans in the darkness outside. "Remember, we want them alive," came Jaramir's voice, distinctive even after all these months. "Can't use dead hostages to control that mountain man." "What about the baby?" another voice asked. "Babies cry too much anyway. Might be doing them a favor." The casual cruelty in the man's tone made Magdalene's blood run cold. She held Aurora closer, whispering wordless prayers for protection. The sound of splintering wood told her they had kicked in the front door. Heavy footsteps moved through the cabin, deliberately loud and intimidating. Mrs. Ironwood. Jaramir called mockingly, come out, wherever you are. We just want to have a little chat." More footsteps, closer now. They were checking the other rooms, moving systematically toward the bedroom where she waited. "Found them," someone shouted, and suddenly the bedroom door burst open. 3 men stood silhouetted in the doorway, Jaramir in the center, flanked by 2 others she didn't recognize. Even in the dim light, she could see the ugly excitement in their faces. Well, Jaramir said, his voice oily with false charm. "The famous Mrs. Ironwood. And this must be the little bastard she was carrying when she hooked herself a mountain man." "Please," Magdalene said, trying to keep her voice steady. "The baby hasn't done anything to hurt you. Whatever grievance you have with my husband, our grievance," Jaramir interrupted, stepping into the room, "is with anyone who thinks they're better than us. Your husband cost me the use of my right arm and got me thrown out of decent work. Time to collect on that debt." He reached toward Aurora, and something primal and fierce rose up in Magdalene's chest. Without conscious thought, she found herself on her feet, placing her body between her daughter and the threat. "Don't touch her," she said, and her voice carried a strength that surprised even her. Jeremiah laughed. What are you going to do to stop me, little mama? You're all alone up here, and the crack of a rifle shot cut through the night air, followed immediately by a scream of pain from somewhere outside the cabin. Then chaos erupted as shouts and gunfire filled the darkness. What the hell? One of Jeremiah's men started to say, but his words were cut off as a massive shadow filled the bedroom doorway. Caspian stood there like an avenging angel, his rifle held ready and his pale blue eyes burning with deadly purpose. Step away from my wife, he said quietly, and there was something in his voice that made all three men freeze. Caspian. Jeremiah snarled. You're supposed to be right where I need to be, Caspian finished, which is between you and my family. The standoff lasted only seconds, but it felt like hours. Then Jeremiah made the mistake of reaching for his gun, and Caspian moved with fluid precision, the rifle butt catching the man across the temple and dropping him to the floor unconscious. The other two men tried to run, but found the doorway blocked by Marcus and two other Valley men, all armed and ready. Within minutes, it was over. Jeremiah's entire crew had been captured or driven off, with minimal injuries to the defending force. The reign of terror that had gripped Timber Creek for months was finally ended. Later, after the prisoners had been taken away and the Valley men had returned to their homes, Caspian sat in the rocking chair holding Aurora while Magdalene made tea with hands that were finally steady. I was so scared, she admitted as she brought him a steaming cup. Not just for us, but for you. When that shooting started, all I could think was that I might lose you. You're not going to lose me, he said firmly. Not to men like that. Not to anything if I can help it. Promise me something, she said, settling onto the arm of his chair and leaning against his shoulder. Anything. Promise me we're done with the past now. No more dangerous men from lumber camps, no more violence, no more looking over our shoulders. Promise me we can just be a family. Caspian looked down at Aurora, who had fallen asleep in his arms, her tiny fist curled around his thumb. Then he looked up at Magdalene, his eyes soft with love and contentment. I promise, he said quietly. From now on, our only adventure is watching this little princess grow up and maybe giving her a brother or sister to play with. The suggestion made Magdalene's cheeks warm with anticipation. Is that a proposal, Mr. Ironwood? It's a promise, Mrs. Ironwood. One I intend to spend the rest of my life keeping. 5 years later, the sounds of laughter and running feet filled the cabin as Aurora chased her younger brother through the main room, both children shrieking with delight as they played tag around the furniture. 3-year-old River had his father's pale blue eyes and his mother's golden hair, and possessed an energy that seemed to power him from dawn to dusk. Careful around the table, Magdalene called out, but she was smiling as she said it. The chaos of 2 active children had transformed their once quiet cabin into something wonderfully alive and vibrant. Mama, River took my carved horse. Aurora protested, her dark hair flying as she cornered her little brother near the fireplace. I was just looking. River replied with the innocent indignation of a toddler caught in mischief. Both of you, come. Help me with the garden, Caspian said from the doorway, his deep voice carrying the authority that could settle any dispute between his children. Both Aurora and River immediately abandoned their argument and raced toward him, competing to be the first to reach his outstretched arms. Magdalene watched from the kitchen window as her husband led their children to the expanded vegetable garden, patiently teaching Aurora how to identify which tomatoes were ready for harvest, while River helped by picking flowers and presenting them to his sister with 3-year-old gallantry. The sight still filled her with wonder sometimes. This gentle giant of a man who had once been feared throughout the lumber camps, now kneeling in the dirt to show a little boy the difference between a weed and a carrot sprout. Fatherhood had revealed depths of patience and tenderness in Caspian that she suspected even he hadn't known existed. "Mama," Aurora called, running toward the cabin with a basket of tomatoes. "Look how many we got. Papa says we can make sauce for the winter." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Magdalene replied, taking the basket and admiring their harvest. At 8 years old, Aurora had grown into a confident, curious child who showed equal interest in her father's woodworking skills and her mother's artistic pursuits. Her latest project was a series of sketches documenting the wildlife around their mountain home. "Can we go fishing tomorrow?" River asked hopefully, tugging at his mother's skirt. "Papa promised to teach me how to catch the big ones." "If the weather holds," Magdalene agreed, ruffling his hair. "But first, both of you need baths. You're absolutely covered in garden soil." The evening routine of bathing children, preparing dinner, and settling everyone down for the night had become as natural to her as breathing. As she tucked River into the small bed Caspian had built for him, the little boy wrapped his arms around her neck with fierce affection. "Mama," he said, "seriously, are you and Papa going to have another baby?" The question caught her by surprise, though perhaps it shouldn't have. River had been asking increasingly sophisticated questions lately, his young mind trying to understand the world around him. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" "Because Mrs. Rosalind was talking to you about babies when she came to visit, and you keep touching your tummy like Aurora's mama did before she had her new baby." Magdalene glanced down, realizing that she had indeed been unconsciously placing her hand over her still flat abdomen. It was too early to be certain, but the signs were becoming harder to ignore: the missed monthly cycle, the subtle changes in her body, the way certain smells had started making her feel queasy. "Would you like another baby brother or sister?" she asked instead of answering directly. River considered this with the gravity of a philosopher. "A sister," he decided. "Aurora teaches me things, but sometimes she thinks she's too grown up to play with me. A little sister would have to play with me." "What about a little brother?" "I guess that would be okay too," he said magnanimously. "As long as Papa still has time to teach me about fishing and woodworking and stuff." "Papa will always have time for you," Magdalene assured him, kissing his forehead. "No matter how big our family gets, you're his first son. That makes you special." Later, after both children were asleep, Magdalene found Caspian on the front porch as she often did, enjoying the peace of evening after the wonderful chaos of their days. But tonight, instead of staring out at the forest, he was carving something by lamplight, a small wooden cradle, she realized, barely larger than a doll's bed. "Starting early this time," she said softly, settling beside him on the porch swing he had built for her during her second pregnancy. "Thought I might be imagining things," he replied, not looking up from his carving. "But you've been tired lately. And this morning when you were cooking breakfast, the smell of eggs made you turn green. Very observant, Mr. Ironwood." "I pay attention to what matters to me," he said simply. "So ... Are we having another baby?" "I think so," she confirmed, placing her hand over his where it rested on the tiny cradle. "Are you happy about it?" Caspian set down his carving tools and turned to face her fully, his pale blue eyes bright with joy and wonder. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Grateful, amazed, slightly terrified, that's closer to accurate. Terrified? After 2 successful pregnancies and births? "Terrified that I might be getting too comfortable with this happiness," he admitted. "Sometimes I wake up and can't quite believe this is my life. That I have you, and Aurora, and River, and now—" He placed his large hand gently over her stomach. "Another miracle on the way." "It's not a miracle," she said softly. "It's just love creating more love. The most natural thing in the world. For you, maybe." For me, it still feels like magic every single day. They sat in comfortable silence. For a while, listening to the night sounds of the mountain owls calling, the distant rustle of small animals in the underbrush, the whisper of wind through the pine trees. This peaceful world they had built together seemed far removed from the violence and uncertainty of their early days. "Do you ever miss it?" Caspian asked suddenly. "Miss what?" "The excitement, the adventure. When we first met, your life was all danger and uncertainty and dramatic rescues. Now it's just ... this. Ordinary domestic life with an ordinary mountain man." Magdalene laughed, a sound full of genuine amusement. "Ordinary? Caspian, you're 7 feet tall, you can split logs with your bare hands, and you once faced down 4 armed men to protect me. There's nothing ordinary about you." "You know what I mean." "I do know what you mean," she said more seriously, "and the answer is no. I don't miss the danger or the uncertainty. I don't miss being afraid all the time, or wondering if I'd live to see another day. What I have now, what we have, is the greatest adventure of my life. Even when River tracks mud through the house and Aurora decides to redecorate her bedroom walls with her art supplies?" "Especially then," she replied firmly. "Those aren't problems, Caspian. They're the sounds of a happy childhood, the evidence of children who feel safe enough to explore and create and make messes. Every day I watch our kids grow and learn. Every night I fall asleep in your arms knowing we're all safe and loved. That's not ordinary. That's extraordinary." He was quiet for a long moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and wooden. It was a tiny horse, perfectly carved and sanded smooth, a miniature version of the larger toys he made for their children. "For the new baby," he said, placing it in her palm. "Whether it's a boy or a girl, figured they'd like horses." Magdalene held the little carving up to the lamplight, admiring the delicate detail work. "It's beautiful. But you know you don't have to make something for the baby every day, right? You've already carved enough toys to stock a general store." "I like making things for our family," he said simply. "Gives my hands something to do while my mind processes how lucky I am." "We're both lucky," she corrected, leaning against his shoulder. "Remember when you said you didn't care if Aurora wasn't your blood child? That you'd love her anyway? Of course. You've kept that promise and more. She adores you completely. To her, you're not her stepfather, you're just Papa. The only father she's ever known or needed. She's made it easy to love her," Caspian replied. "She's got your spirit and curiosity, and she's never once made me feel like anything less than her real father. Because that's exactly what you are. Biology doesn't make a father love, does. Showing up every day does. Teaching them right from wrong, protecting them, believing in them, that's what makes you their Papa." A soft sound from inside the cabin made them both pause and listen. River, talking in his sleep as he often did, his young voice mumbling something about fishing with Papa. "He's dreaming about tomorrow's fishing trip," Magdalene said with a smile. "Good dreams," Caspian agreed, "the kind every child should have." As they finally prepared to go inside for the night, Magdalene took one last look around their mountain home. The cabin had grown over the years additional rooms for the children, an expanded porch, a workshop where Caspian crafted furniture and toys. The garden was larger now, the chicken coop had been rebuilt twice, and there were plans for a barn to house the additional livestock they were considering. But more than the physical changes, she could feel the love that had built this place, layer by layer, year by year. Every improvement had been made with family in mind, every addition designed to nurture and protect and provide space for their children to grow. "Magdalene," Caspian said softly as they reached the front door, "thank you." "For what?" "For trusting me with your heart, for giving me children to raise and love, for making me into the man I always hoped I could be, but never believed I was capable of becoming." She rose on her toes to kiss him, tasting the sweetness of contentment in the simple gesture. "Thank you for proving that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the words, 'I don't care if the child isn't mine.' Best decision I ever made," he murmured against her lips. As they went inside to check on their sleeping children. One last time before bed, Magdalene reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. She had started as a frightened, pregnant woman with nowhere to go, and he had been a lonely mountain man convinced he was unworthy of love. Together, they had built something beautiful, a family rooted in acceptance, nurtured by devotion, and strengthened by the daily choice to love each other completely. Their children would grow up knowing they were wanted, protected, and cherished. And someday, when Aurora and River and the new baby were old enough to understand, they would learn that the greatest love stories weren't always about passion and romance. Sometimes they were about two broken people choosing to heal together, choosing to build something better than either could have imagined alone. The mountain man had married her anyway, and in doing so had given them all the most precious gift imaginable. A home where love was the only currency that mattered and where being wanted was never in question.